Joined now by Jeff Paterson, who was gracing us in the Go-Goat Sports studio, one half of the rink-wide duo with Andrew Wadden. They were busy yesterday after a 3-2 loss in Arizona. Blake in Montreal, calling the MLS match there tomorrow. How you doing?
Good. Look, work from home is terrific. It provides some flexibility. We have the capabilities, but it's also spring break, and the house is just crowded. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to get out of the house and come into the studio today. So here I am.
Let the record show Jeff got to the first Friday of March break, because it's a 2-week March break now, and we were old man grumbling about that until the family annoyed him so much and drove him down here to Wall Center. Good to see you. Thank you for the visit. Let's start with the Bodog poll question before we move forward. And we've had this poll question in the hopper for a few weeks now. When we first mapped it out, I think they were all sitting there around 42 points. Well, now they're all sitting there around 61, 62 points. Who do you think is going to finish second on this club in scoring, Jeff? JT Miller, who's on 62 points, or Hughes and Kuzmenko, both on 61 after last night?
I think it's going to be Kuzmenko. I think he'll ride the wave of Elias Pettersson's push to 100 points, and Petey with his 2 last night in Arizona up to 85 with 15 to go. So it's right there. Just a point a game. That's all anybody's asking of Elias Pettersson. A soft schedule. It's certainly doable. And I just think that Andrei Kuzmenko may score every game the rest of the way. The way that he's going right now, has scored in 4 straight. It's his second 4-game goal-scoring streak in the last 13. So,
are you seeing any different habits from him, Jeff? Like why the streak, do you think?
Well, I mean, he's scored a lot, obviously, all season. So, I was looking at the goals on this recent run here, and, last night was sort of that conventional in the blue paint, tape, stick on the ground, and guys will, he's playing with skilled players, so they're going to get him the puck. But, we saw the Ottawa game the other night when he opened the scoring, took that hard pass from Miller, and, took the puck to his backhand, and I thought showed some real skill there and some finesse, and we knew that he had it. He scored in different ways, but I guess the common theme for me is just, as it's been much of the season, is how close he is to the net on so many of his goals. And there is an art and a skill to getting open and being ready for those passes, and then his teammates are finding him. And so, I have to think that Paterson will score a few along the way. He'll probably pick up some assists there, but he'll continue to score. And I know we've been talking, will he get to 40? Well, he's at 34 now with 15 games. So I have to think that he'll wind up somewhere in the 40s as well. The interesting one to me, guys, is Quinn Hughes, who has gone 3 games without a point right now. Audible gasp. That shouldn't be noteworthy, except it's the first time all season that it has happened for Quinn Hughes, which just speaks to his consistency. And even when the team wasn't playing well, he was still producing. But I do think this is part and parcel of the workload. And again, 11 minutes in the third period last night, almost 29 minutes of ice time. Everybody's got a breaking point. And I think with Quinn, a little bit less would be more. And the power play that went 0 for 5 last night, that's where he picks up so many of his points, and Miller too. So of those 3, and I think it's going to be a bit of a horse race as long as they all stay healthy. But I do think at the wire, Kuzmenko will edge out the other 2 to finish second.
And as we discussed Rick Tocchet 20 games in yesterday, that was one of the points that was coming back in dispute, or at least arguing against any kind of sort of Tocchet effect here, is just the minutes for Quinn Hughes being unsustainable when you take a look at just how much he is playing in February and March. He averaged 25, 27 in February. He's averaging 27, 22 in March, and he was at 24, 42 back in January under Bruce Boudreau, and after Tocchet came in saying we got to play the top players less, and in the case of Quinn Hughes and with the injuries on defense, hasn't had that luxury. Tell me I'm wrong. Anthony Beauvillier is the perfect line mate for Pettersson and Kuzmenko.
He certainly looked the part here in the 18 games since the trade. He's got 16 points, a couple of primary assists last night. He's not the flashiest guy in the world. He doesn't beat players one-on-one with his skill, but he skates well. He's able to get in on the forecheck. And again, not the biggest guy in the world, but I think he understands how to be effective on the forecheck. And he looks like he needed a change of scenery. We've spent so much time of this season talking about Brock Besser needing a change of scenery. I guess this is the danger if you're the Vancouver Canucks, that you go somewhere else, you do get a new lease on life. Now, he could not have asked for a softer landing spot than the right wing with Elias Pettersson, who has been all-world and has emerged as a top 10 scorer in the National Hockey League, but he has held up his end of the bargain as well. I think the caveat in all of this is it's been 18 games. And for the same things that we've said about other players, there isn't a lot of pressure. Like, he's not playing for a contract this offseason. He's got 1 year to go. And if you're the Vancouver Canucks, it's been a nice fit. And Paterson and Kuzmenko obviously have had chemistry since training camp. Beauvillier has stepped in, and in no way has he, dragged Elias Pettersson down. Pettersson's continued to be effective and productive, and Beauvillier's been a part of that. The power play production, nobody was ever going to just step in and be Bo Horvat. Mm-hmm. And we saw the recent homestand that Beauvillier actually was bumped off the first unit power play, and I think it sort of had come to that. So that's an area where he hasn't been highly productive. But Andrew and I were kicking it around on Rink Quite last night, sort of like, what is the future here? And there can't be any rush whatsoever on the part of the hockey club to extend this guy. There just can't.
No.
You need to see more than they've got 15 games to go, so it's going to be 32 or 3 games as a Canuck. And, the other thing, too, is when you look at the trade, the way it went down, the Islanders were trying to move that contract and that player for a long time. And ultimately, they were able to fold it into the Horvat trade, but in some ways, the Canucks did the Islanders a pretty big favor in taking the $4 million this year and next, where other teams were getting assets and getting sweeteners to take on those kind of contracts, and the Canucks didn't. And for a team that stated its goal was to create cap flexibility, you take Beauvillier back at $4 million, and then you go and use the assets in the Horvat deal to get Hronek. You've done nothing, absolutely nothing, to carve out any cap space in those transactions.
No. Now, look, you've got time, use it. Not just these 15 games, but all of next season as well, Jeff. I'd be in no rush to extend him. That said, what I like about him is he can be a finisher. He can be a passer on a line with two guys who have a lot of offensive skill. And quite right, when looking at the trade, if you're disappointed that that a first-round pick turned into Hronek, sure, fair enough. But we were also looking at Beauvillier, not necessarily as your classic cap dump, but an at-market middle six winger that really didn't get anybody excited. If he keeps up this production, there's some value in that contract for next season at $4.1 million.
And he's got some pedigree too.
Yep.
Like, this isn't coming out of nowhere.
No. And he skates too. And this hasn't been the fleetest.
Yeah, and I go back to the sort of new lease on life. He had only known the Islanders' way. And at the time of the trade, he wasn't playing and wasn't producing particularly well. The team wasn't. I mean, they needed that shakeup. They went out and got Bo Horvat because they weren't scoring much, they weren't winning much, and Beauvillier was a part of that. I think he'd gone 9 games without a goal at the time of the trade. He didn't have a power play point. And again, he could not have handpicked, honestly, around the NHL, outside of a spot with McDavid. I'm not sure that he could have picked a better spot to wind up in on the back end of the trade, and he has stepped in and fit in, and he seems like a pretty low-maintenance guy who just shows up and plays hard. There's a lot to like, and I'm in no rush to, the offseason priority has to be Elias Pettersson, trying to figure out him on the long term, and then reshaping this defense core, and I would think Beauvillier is somewhere down that list considerably in terms of, what do you do with him? And I just don't think that there's any need to re-up him in the offseason. I think you want to see a little bit more. Can this carry over into next season? But he does fit the age range that Jim Rutherford has spoken about so frequently in his time at the top of the food chain here, and that is that, they're looking for these guys that are sort of 25, 26, and Beauvillier is right there in that window in that portion of his career.
I think it's clear that going forward, whether it's Beauvillier or somebody else, there needs to be speed on Elias Pettersson's wing. Even a detuned Ilya Mikheyev. Remember, he flourished with Paterson early in the season as well. I mean, Mikheyev didn't even have his real gas and still was scoring goals and was fast enough, obviously. He was still probably faster than average. So whether it's Mikheyev or Beauvillier going forward, I think we figured that out, haven't we, that he does need speed?
Yeah, speed certainly backs off defenders, and once you create space, that's when Elias Pettersson goes to work. And so you're right. At one point this season, it was the two Russians, Mikheyev and Kuzmenko, with Pettersson in the middle, and they had success. I mean, the common thread here is Elias Pettersson, and I think as we look, and last night was instructive too, Travis Boyd, remember Travis Boyd as a Canuck? No, you probably don't.
He's on my list. We've already talked about him in hashtags.
But 14 goals for Travis Boyd, getting an opportunity to play higher in a lineup, to get some power play time. He was never going to get any of that here, but he's got 14 goals. Brock Besser and Connor Garland are both sitting on a dozen, and this is just to bring the conversation back to the Canucks cannot lose sight of the fact that they have one playmaking center. And the jury is still out on JT Miller as a playmaking center. over 82 games. I know he's a point producer, but so much of his production last year was on the power play. And when Bo Horvat was here, that was one of my knocks on him, was I liked a lot of Bo's game, but he wasn't a distributor, a playmaker. And so this just, again, sort of underscores the need for this group to somehow, some way, cash-strapped and cap-strapped, to go and find an upgrade at third-line center. It's not Sheldon Dries for next season. It's not Nils Aman. We do this exercise almost every offseason where the Vancouver Canucks need a third-line center. Lots of teams do, but I think part of the issue with these underproductive wingers is that really everybody that plays with Paterson gets the Paterson bump. Anybody that doesn't get a chance to play with Elias Pettersson, we look at them as having a disappointing season. And some of it's on the wingers, but I also think it's who's getting them the puck, who's making the plays, who's putting them in positions to pull the trigger. And the answer this season really has been, next to nobody.
The defense has been improved. And nobody's perfect for 82 games, but there was some hallmarks of chaos giraffe there, to borrow a phrase for Tyler Myers. He's been incident free for a little while now. Are you any less heartened? If they're forced to use Tyler Myers next year, and that may sound like a grave sentence, but I think in an ideal world they don't have Tyler Myers next season, but. Is it repeatable, the nice stretch of hockey he's played recently?
Well, it's fascinating to me that decent stretch of hockey really has coincided with OEL leaving the lineup. And for, good chunks of this season, those two have played together. And, for the most part, it's been Myers has been paired with Guillaume Brisebois, who's just coming in and been a stabilizing force for the most part, and quiet and goes about his business and doesn't make the mistakes, and somehow it's just kind of that's translated over to Myers, because I think that's been the biggest noticeable difference in the last, I would say, 10 games. There was that night in Nashville that he was on for all the goals, and two of them he was behind the goaltender, and it was probably his worst game of the season, but he has.
Everybody's got a that night in Nashville story, by the way.
Very true.
And incidentally, I've already apologized to the young man, but did you ever think you would hear the phrase Guillaume Brisebois stabilizing force?
I know, but this is where we are. Look, he's far from a perfect player. We've known that for a while now. It's been on display for all to see. But, this is a guy that the mistakes are amplified, I think, by his size. He stands out, and you're drawn to him, and when the mistakes come, they stand out because he stands out. And so all anybody's really asking for is just to play that quieter, safer game. But look, at this stage of his career, just turned 33 in February, this is who he is. He's not going to have this extreme makeover Tyler Myers edition. I think you have to live with the mistakes, his processing, his reads, under pressure, the panic threshold, all those types of things. That's unfortunately who he is. And he's been given ample opportunities, and he's not the first guy, but the big players always seem to get more and more opportunities. So, it's going to be interesting. Same conversation that we've had before about once that bonus is paid out, is he attractive to some of those teams that need that type of contract to get to the salary cap floor? And I would say yes. So I still think that's got to be something the Canucks are looking at in the offseason. The only problem there is if you get out from under Tyler Myers in the final year of his contract, Philip Hronek's going to need a new contract in just over a year. And so, I would assume that he'll get a bump in pay, especially if he's anywhere close to the player that they hope he is. And really, I think you kind of have to slot Hronek's next contract somewhere in the neighborhood of what Tyler Myers has been making here for far too long.
To answer your question, Blake, I'll vote yes, because I think he can play third pair minutes next year after Hronek and Bear, and that may may help him out if he has to be here.
It's an expensive third pair.
Yeah, no, absolutely, but the die is cast on the contract, right? There's nothing you can do about that now. You just got to make the most of it. Bruce Boudreau thinks Elias Pettersson would be a great captain, and said so on NHL Network. What did you make of the ex-coach's comments?
I was a little surprised at how much play and run it got in this market, only because I think we've all said and thought that. Now, Bruce obviously would have a little better institutional knowledge of the person and the player and working with him, but obviously would have been a way bigger story had Bruce Boudreau come out and said, I don't think Elias Pettersson is captain material. So the fact that Bruce said it, sure, it's another vote. I think Bo Horvat had endorsed Pettersson at one point over the All-Star weekend as well. Again, I think we see that. He is the leader. There's no doubt he is the most skilled player on this team, and there are a handful of skilled players, but he is heads and shoulders. In the season he's having kind of bears that out. So, nice of Bruce to give him the bump, even after he's no longer in the employ of the Vancouver Canucks. But I wasn't surprised to hear it, I suppose, and the surprise to me kind of was the reaction in the market.
The other comment that he made that, and we had mentioned this in the past, but to hear a coach say it by way of confirmation, he doesn't like to be yelled at. I think we've known this about Elias from the jump. He's a bit of a sensitive soul. He's a bit of a feeler. And I think he also doesn't suffer fools well. And part of it is like, really? Do we have to resort to yelling? Like, can we not just discuss this a little bit more reasonably? And
I think so. I think he's pretty mature in that, just speak it to me.
Exactly.
I'll get it.
And I think this is somewhere where Travis Green lost him, that it was too hard, too tough, too much yelling, too much sort of negative reinforcement, if you will, particularly in the film room. What do you think? What do you make of the dynamic thus far between Rick Tocchet and Elias on that score?
Yeah, I think all these top-end guys, they want to play. I think they're enjoying the ice time. I think it's a little too much on some nights, and to what end, ultimately, is the question that I ask when we're talking about Quinn Hughes and how much he's playing. But Elias Pettersson's had nights of 22 to 24, which is certainly a healthy workload for these games that ultimately don't matter. So I think the players like that they're getting the star treatment. His production has been as good, if not better, under Tocchet than it was under Bruce Boudreau, and it's been a spectacular season for Elias Pettersson. It's interesting to me, and the reasons are well documented. I haven't been around Paterson and the team as much this season, but I was at a game recently, and since they put the A on him and I think gave him this sense of where all this ultimately is heading and that the A could be swapped out for a C, there really wasn't, like you used the word maturity there. It was a different Elias Pettersson after the game. The Canucks had won, and he had figured in the scoring. But I've seen him enough over the years when he gets bored with the scrums and body language will let you know. And I thought, and maybe I was reading too much into it, and I hadn't been around him on a daily basis, but there just seemed to be more of a statesman at the age of 24. Like, I think he understood that now I've got a letter that this is going to be expected of me on a nightly basis here, and whether I like it or not, I'm going to have to stand in there and just face these questions. And again, it wasn't a night where they were pointed questions, but I just thought his body language and the tone, I've certainly seen him over the years let you know when he's done with it, whether you as the questioners are. And this one, I just thought, okay, that felt like a more mature Elias Pettersson sort of accepting this role of leadership, and I thought that was a step in the right direction.
Last one here, Jeff. Canucks, St. Louis, Arizona. How do they finish? Who's worst? Who's next worst? Who wins that little three-team derby?
Well, the Canucks still play the Coyotes twice, and they play the Blues once, so big games ahead among the 15 remaining.
Huge games.
Game 82 is back at the Mullet. Can you imagine the implications that one is going to have?
Have you seen their record at the Mullet? Like, they are out of sight. They're a playoff team at Mullet Arena.
They're 19-11-3. 19 of their 26 wins on the season have come at home. They have 7 road wins. They're a disaster away from home. But at home, they've embraced the quirkiness of the small building. Although last night in spring break, wasn't surprised, 4,600, and there was, again, enough Canuck support and Canuck fans in attendance, and I'm sure that's the case for a lot of the teams and people, the curiosity factor of seeing this building for the first time. But yeah, they find a way. It wasn't pretty last night, but power play got them the job done. So, it stands to reason that they're going to continue to pick up points, and we're talking about Arizona. Pick up points at home. The Canucks have been middling at home and on the road, better at home after the recent homestand and rattling off 5 straight victories. The St. Louis Blues, I can't figure them out. Is their goalie going to behave? Is he going to be available to them? I don't know. They traded off a bunch, but they brought in some pieces as well. I still think the Canucks, with the softness of their schedule, are likely to pick up more wins than a lot of people want to believe. So 15 games to go. It won't shock me if the Canucks go 9-6 or 10-5, and I guess the question is, will those other teams match them? But guys, as we sit here on St. Patrick's Day, this deep into a season, the fact that the Vancouver Canucks and Arizona Coyotes are tied in points, Like it
It's
truly
astonishing.
It is.
When you think back to the beginning of the year and what people, and myself included, were saying about this Arizona Coyotes team, that it might just be the worst team of the salary cap era, worse than that Colorado team of a number of years ago, that they were actively trying to lose and tank the season, and that it was disgraceful. And I will give the coaches and players some credit there because they have competed hard under extremely difficult circumstances.
I don't, not that the league should be spending a ton of time talking about the Coyotes' on-ice product, but I don't think anybody or nearly enough people are talking about Clayton Keller and the season that he's having. 72 points with that supporting cast it's remarkable. And they've got some goaltending, obviously, and that is the great equalizer. But just to your point, Matt, about preseason predictions, because I remember the final game of the Canucks preseason was at home. The Coyotes came to town.
Right.
Nomads, after playing preseason games in Tulsa and Oklahoma City and Boise. They left Vancouver and went to Boise. And the Canucks, Thatcher Demko had a 7-save shutout.
I remember. I was at the game, Jeff. And it was sub-NHL.
Shutout. And so I know it wasn't their full squad, but still, I think a lot of sort of my preseason predictions were based on that. I was like, oh my God, this is going to be terrible. So, yeah, credit to them. But still, just absolutely mind-blowing that as we sit this deep into the season, the Canucks and Coyotes are tied on 63
All right,
points.
we'll put you the Canucks ahead of both the Blues and the Coyotes in the draft lottery odds. Marvelous stuff. Thank you, sir. Have a good weekend. We'll catch up on Monday.
You'll see me again on Monday.
You're hosting for Blake.
I am, yes.